Solemn swear.
I, Richard Nixon, do solemnly swear
That I will...
America doesn't do... Compared with the coronation of a British king or the consecration of a new pope, the inauguration of a president as a taking office becomes the most powerful man in the world. Indeed, each successively became the most powerful man in the history of the world. No emperor, no king, no general ever commanded the military power available to... No other statesman has so much power in foreign affairs.
5 presidents on the...
"36 men have become President of the United States. The last 5 have committed themselves to public record through television interviews. TV interviews with politicians have a kind of false folksiness to them. The muscle is often concealed under the homespun. That's the first rule you might remember. The second rule is that all American politicians are worth their history. So, forewarned, we begin. 5 presidents on presidential power.
But one man in the government to look after their interests, and that's the President of the United States. He's the lobbyist for 150 million people. And when he ceases to be that, those people are in a pretty bad way so far as the government of the United States is concerned.
Well, you know, that old story about Abraham Lincoln in the cabinet. He says, all in favor say aye, and the whole cabinet voted aye, and then all opposed no, and Lincoln voted no, and he said the vote is no. So that naturally the Constitution places the responsibility on the president.
There's no possibility of the Congress limiting the powers of the president. If he's got the authority to act, there's nobody that can stop him. He could have 100% of his staff can be against him, and his decision is final.
The fellow that has power is the one that uses it sparingly, because you can throw it away very quickly with arrogance and autocracy, without consultation, and you can dissipate it. And most presidents do. I'm sure that I had less power the day I went out than I did the day I went in.
My strong point, if I have a strong point, is performance. I always do more than I say. I always produce more than I promise. I don't mean that from time to time I may not have made promises that I was unable to keep. But generally speaking, whether it's in the foreign field or in the domestic field, I believe that actions are what count.
Govern is to choose. The power of presidential choice may be balanced by the Congress, checked by the judiciary, criticized by the press and the public, but after all the advice is in, the president must choose. Though the information at hand may be incomplete or inaccurate, and though every president may feel that history could rebuke him for acting hastily, crisis demands choice. The hardest choices are his and only his, because the power is his and only his.
President Eisenhower said to me in January 19th, he said, there are no easy matters will ever come to you as president. If they're easy, they will be settled at a lower level. So the matters that finally come to you as president are always the difficult matters, the matters which carry with them large implications.
Well, Mr. President, in a period of 3 months, you became president, the war in Europe ended, Japan surrendered, the nuclear age began, the United Nations was created. No man in history ever rode such a tiger in such a short time. How did you manage it? How did you keep your equilibrium?
All my life, whenever it comes time to make a decision, I make it. And forget about it and go to work on something else. And when these things came before me as President of the United States, I made the decision on them and went into the next thing. You never have time to stop. You've got to keep going because there's always a decision just ahead of you that you've got to make. And you don't want to look back. If you make a mistake in one of those decisions, correct it by another decision and go ahead, and that's all you can do.
I made all the mistakes that one can make. And I think there's a misapprehension that presidents are never told the facts. I don't think that's true. I think the president gets more bad news than anyone. And most of my day was spent telling me what's gone wrong the day before. Every man that's worthy of his salt that's in your cabinet is not going to paint an untrue, rosy, false picture to the man that's responsible for putting him in the cabinet. And I frequently read where I was misled. And people, I think, really want to be charitable with me, and they're sympathetic with me. And they say my advisors, the military, misled me. Secretary Rusk or Secretary McNamara misled me, or my cabinet officers misled me. Well, that's a lot of bosh, Tommy rot. Nobody misled me. I don't recall a serious matter ever coming up that my people didn't give me both sides of it. And when it was all over, you couldn't pass the buck. You had to face up, and there was nobody responsible but yourself, and they were my decisions. And if they're bad ones, why, it falls on my broad shoulders. And that's true of every president.
Well, one of the benefits, Mr. Smith, of course, of being in this position and having gone through so much before I got here is that a man tends not to make as many mistakes. Now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't make some mistakes. I've made my share, not only as president, but before. But on the other hand, an individual knows himself so well that he paces himself properly. And if he goes through a period of very great tense activity, he will watch for the moment afterwards when in a moment of letdown he might make a mistake. I don't mean that I've mastered it completely, because I would be the first to admit that I'm just as human as anybody else.
They used to say the president proposes, but the Congress disposes. In recent years, presidents have often proposed and disposed, especially in foreign affairs. All the powers of Congress are specific in the Constitution. For the presidency, there's that great general sentence, the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States. Few specific powers given him, few specific powers withheld from him. He is given a blank check, almost. So struggle between President and Congress is built in. The idea is that neither one will end up complete winner for all time.
We came into power, the Republicans did, for the first time in 20 years. There was not a single senator in the Republican senator in the Senate when I came in there who had ever served with a Republican president. Now, as a result, they were raised in this tradition of antagonism between the executive and the legislature. And it was very, very difficult for Republican senators at first to remember that their job was now to cooperate with the president and he with them. On the contrary, they felt that they had to cut him down at first. It was instinctive.
Fact is, I think the Congress looks more powerful sitting here than it did when I was there in the Congress. But that's because when you're in Congress, you're one of 100 in the Senate or one of 435 in the House. So that the power is so divided. But from here, I look at a Congress, and I look at the collective power of the Congress, particularly the block action, which it wants to, and it's a substantial power.
Presidents frequently withhold patronage to senators or officials that they have a controversy with, or they hold up the appointment, or sometimes they'll just ignore the senator's recommendation. It's the president's prerogative to make the nomination. It's the Senate's prerogative to confirm it.
The president doesn't have a fight or two with Congress, is not considered a very strong man. It's necessary. It's all right. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a personal matter. It's a matter of the Congress always trying to infringe the presidential rights. And a good, strong president, the Congress will accuse him of trying to infringe the congressional rights. And in each case, there's always some good accomplished because the final result will be in the interest of the people. And the fact that we have that division of powers makes it much more safe for the people than it would otherwise. The only efficient government is a dictator's government. And a free government can't be as efficient as one where one decision meets the whole situation, and it's not good. I think our government is the best one that's ever been organized in the history of the world, and I know something about the governments of the world.
The press is the only business with a constitutional guarantee of its right to exist. Most presidents feel that each day starts with trouble, provided by papers and broadcasts. It is the assigned constitutional duty of the press to bird dog the powerful. But presidents must make decisions by compromise, cajolery, sometimes by secrecy. So the press versus White House struggle is also built in. Another conflict neither side is supposed to win decisively for all time.
The men who report the news, the working press, I call them, make an honest effort to report the thing as it happens. I think if there's any distortion, and there is a great deal, the distortion happens with the blue pencil and the news editors in the office.
No, understand, I'm not complaining about my treatment of the press. I think it's a philosophical difference. I have many friends in the press, personal friends, as you're quite aware. I've never taken on a member of the press individually. I've never called a publisher since I've been president. I've never called an editor to complain about anything. I've never called a television station to complain about it, and I never shall. As long as I have the opportunity to talk to the American people on a program like this directly, then if I fail to communicate, it's my fault.
Well, I think in peacetime, you run very great risks if you try to put any restrictions on the press. Our strength comes from knowledge, from understanding of our own people. And I really believe you've got to be very, and could have been more reprehensible than a newspaper which right in the midst of a war published the fact that we had broken the Japanese code. This endangered the lives of many thousands of young men and was a very reprehensible act. I thought, to my mind, the people responsible should have been punished very severely. But that was in war. That's a fairly different thing.
I would say that it's an invaluable arm of the presidency as a check, really, on what's going on in administration. And more things come to my attention that cause me either concern or give me information. So I would think that Mr. Khrushchev, operating a totalitarian system which has many advantages as far as being able to move in secret and all the rest, there's a terrific disadvantage not having the abrasive quality of the press applied to you daily to an administration.
The 5 presidents here have presided over the beginning, middle, and end of the Cold War. Congress shall declare war, says the Constitution, but during this era of confrontation, the president, claiming inherent rights as commander-in-chief, developed the power to make war or peace by executive action.
The president makes the foreign policy. He has more power in the foreign policy than any other part of the government because nobody can direct and make the foreign policy but the president himself. He has a Secretary of State and a wonderful coterie of experts in that line. He has the Central Intelligence Agency, he has the National Defense Department and the Commerce Department, all of whom have foreign relations outside the country. But those things must be coordinated, and the president has to make the final decision on what will be done, no matter what it is or how small it may be.
Now, when we've had been in real emergencies, that is the acute emergencies of war, almost automatically, the president has to assume powers that otherwise he would never attempt to exercise. Sometimes these powers are given specifically by the Congress, but often they are not. Now, this is the kind of power, as a matter of fact, the President Kennedy today has that same power. It wasn't given to me individually.
I trust we don't have another Cuban Missile Crisis. I trust we don't have another situation like Cambodia. But I do know that in the modern world, there are times when the Commander-in-Chief, President of the United States, will have to act quickly. I can assure the American people that this president is going to bend over backwards to consult the Senate and consult the House whenever he feels it can be done without jeopardizing the lives of American men. But when it's a question of the lives of American men or the attitudes of people in the Senate, I'm coming down hard on the side of defending the lives of American men.
But there are going to be these demands from time to time from people who feel that all we need to do is mash a button and determine everybody's foreign policy. But we're not living that kind of world anymore. They're going to determine it for themselves, and that's the way it should be. And we're going to have to come and reason with them and try to lead them instead of force them. And I think, have no doubt, but what for centuries to come, that we'll be a leading force in molding opinion of the world, and I think the better they know us, the more they'll like us.
The president as politician. When the Constitution was written, the president was supposed to be above politics. There were no political parties at the time. But by the end of his second term, George Washington inevitably became the head of the Federalist Party. Politics has been defined as the art of the use of power. The most powerful men of our time have had to use politics, whether they liked it or not. Some make the admission frankly, but there's an echo in everything you'll hear of that earlier definition of the presidency, a man who is above the struggle.
The people have an idea, I think, that a man gets to be president just interested in himself and just wants to advance his own political fortunes and just interested in getting reelected. Well, I wouldn't say that all of us are not interested in being reelected. Self-preservation is the first law of nature. But I don't believe a man that I've known that wouldn't have given up
Its ability. We are leaders of our party. We're leaders of our country. But the country comes first, that we have done it. And if...
Well, I think that you have to recognize your own duty to your own party. Indeed, one of the arguments urging me to go run for the presidency was that unless some Republican could win this presidency in 1952, the two-party system was just about gone. And my respect for the two-party system in our country was one of the reasons that finally led me to say, all right, I'll make myself available if they so want to do.
Well, it's just as necessary for a man who understands politics to be in a position of operating the government, which is founded on politics. A free government is a government by politicians, and a politician is a public relations man who knows how to get along with people. And I think the most honorable title that can be given to a man is to say that he's a politician. And I've always said that the great statesmen you read about were all politicians, or they would never have been statesmen. They become statesmen after they're in their graves.
4 of these men are dead. 1 is alive. Yet for each president, whether he was in office or not, there were moments in these interviews that transcended the power of the office itself. It was as if he could see something beyond the presidency. After the ambition and the power came contemplation. After action and the end of office came wisdom.
Presidency, there's a lot of satisfactions to the presidency because particularly, if, as I say, we're all concerned as citizens and as parents and all the rest with all the problems we've been talking about tonight. They're all the problems which if I wasn't president I'd be concerned about as a father or as a citizen. So at least you have an opportunity to do something about them. And if what you do is useful and successful, then of course that's great satisfaction. When as a result of a decision of yours, a failure comes or you're unsuccessful, of course that's a great setback.
I suppose the most important, though, of all of these things is a lack of definite proof that we've made real progress toward achieving peace with justice.
When you come into office, the presidency, one has ideas as to what he can accomplish. And he believes he can accomplish a great deal even though he may have a Congress that is not part of his own party. And then after he gets in, he finds that what he had hoped in terms of achieving goals will not be as great as the actual performance turns out to be. So I would say that in terms of how I have changed, it is in realizing that while we must set high goals and always seek them, that we must not become impatient, and we must plow forward, recognizing that in the end, we're going to make some progress, if not all the progress that we had hoped.
Well, there are a great many things that I would have very much liked to have accomplished while I was President of the United States. I think the 2 most important that I was not able to accomplish were a health program and an educational program for the people of the United States. And we must do that for the simple reason that we can't be the leaders of the free world and draw a color line on opportunity.
President Nixon said to me, how did you feel when you weren't president anymore? And I said, I don't know whether you'll understand this now or not, but you certainly will later. I sat there on that platform and waited for you to stand up and raise your right hand and take the oath of office. And I think the most pleasant words that ever came into my ears was, "So help me God," that you repeated after that oath. Because at that time, I no longer had the fear that I was the man that could make the mistake of involving the world in a war. That I was no longer the man that would have to carry the terrifying responsibility of protecting the lives of this country and maybe the entire world, and unleashing the horrors of some of our great power if I felt that that was required. But that now I could ride back down that avenue, being concerned about what happened, being alarmed about what might happen, but just really knowing that I wasn't going to be the cause of it, that went over to some other man.
These 5 presidents came from widely different backgrounds and at one time or another held widely different political views. Yet as we prepared this broadcast, we were struck by how often each man's thought reflected the ideas of the other. This similarity might be the result of the way we selected these statements, but we think not. For behind the temporary man is the permanent office. There is something about the duties a chief executive must perform that tempers every president. The invisible presence shaping each man is, of course, America. Its strength and system work on a president more than a president can work on the country. The office of the President of the United States ultimately must answer to the people of the country. That is what was intended in 1787 when the post was created, and that's what happens to this day. This is Eric Severide. Good evening.